Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Jacobson. I welcome you all, including the web audience. And for those of you that are here for the first time, physically that is, just by means of a short introduction, I never liked the word class because it always implied some type of like classification and categorization that puts things into a box. And I'm sure we all have some of our not such pleasant childhood memories of sitting in class, not being able to wait till the bell would ring and recess and so on. So instead of the word class, we'll call this a gathering, an ingathering. In the Torah, there's a concept called Vayakel. Moses gathered together the people. And that's a term used again and again for coming together, communing, convening, and gathering together to experience something. It's really essentially the concept of synergy, that when people come together from whatever backgrounds they may be, whoever we are, there's a synergy that we all bring, is something more than the sum of the parts. Using Talmudic expression, the Talmud has a whole calculation that says, to explain the concept of something being more than the sum of the parts, that if one person, for instance, one of you can lift 100 pounds on your own, and I can lift 100 pounds on my own, together what can we lift? So you would think 200 pounds. It's not the case. We can lift together more than 200 pounds. It would be something like 210, 220 pounds. So where's that extra strength coming from? If I can lift 100 and you lift 100, this should only add up to 200 because there's synergy. There's an invisible collective strength that comes from the sum of the parts that's more than the parts themselves. And this grows exponentially with every additional person. In other words, three people is not just 3 times that amount, it keeps on growing and growing. So you can imagine that's on a physical level, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, that's the power of a group. Obviously, it can be used for negative things. Groups have done things that are very destructive, but also can be for positive things. So the Torah's word for so-called a class, a group, coming together studying, is really gathering together and the synergy that emerges from it all. But for that to work, obviously, each of us has to somewhat be receptive to the idea, which is why I always use the analogy, that one of my favorites, of that each of us is like a musical note. I should add, an indispensable musical note in a large composition. And like musical notes in a composition, each of us are indispensable. We also each complement the other. It means I can't play the music without you, and you can't without me. So we both have individuality, your unique note, my unique note, each of us unique notes. At the same time, a synergy of us all together, which is ultimately really the best of both worlds. The power of the individual plus the power of the group. Because often group mentality also creates conformity and demands conformity, and in a sense annihilates individuality. You see this also in relationships. A true loving relationship is not one circle, one person. It's 2 people. It's like this that come together, and each remains who they are. Yet there's something that they transcend and that they join together, which is why in Jewish tradition at a wedding we have a canopy, a chuppah. It's not just symbolic. A chuppah means that there's a hovering force that's more than the sum of the parts that stand under the canopy, the chuppah. The third partner, God. It's a type of transcendence. It requires bittul that I discussed last week, the suspension of self, self-interest, ego, and self-worship is obviously always a impediment that does not allow that transcendence to descend or to manifest. So it requires, with a synergy, like each note has to recognize that there's other notes besides itself. But in no way do those notes compromise that individual note. Now, of course, this is a balance that is not easy to achieve. In nature, we see it all the time. We see harmony within diversity. We see it in our human bodies. In a healthy human body, You have 75 trillion cells. You have so many millions and millions of different functions, yet they all work together in a coordinated way. When it comes to us human beings, however, we have yet to master that type of complementation, that type of, because we have free will, and each of us can choose to play the music or not play the music. So I'd like to believe that this, I'm not going to call it class, as I said, this gathering, is an attempt on my part and all of our parts, an experiment, human experiment, of a social experiment of seeing whether we can achieve something like that. So even though I'm doing the speaking, and you may be doing the listening, but the objective here is not me to speak. I'm just sharing things that are coming from a deeper place, things that I had the privilege to study and learn, but something that really should transcend all of us, and some way go away. And at the bottom line, the results you always see at the end of the evening, at the follow-up, not what happens the second, but if it can lead us all to a more empowering place where we can recognize and connect to that unique, indispensable musical note, which is your soul, and use that to live our lives in a fuller sense, a fuller way, that obviously is the ultimate litmus test that demonstrates that we were successful. So, we shall, here's an attempt, and we shall begin. We've already begun, but this was an introduction before the introduction, so to speak. Like the speaker that says, I'm only going to share a few words, but I have an introduction before I begin. And then he speaks for an hour or whatever it may be. But don't mind, remember, all of life is an introduction. As a matter of fact, in the book, the Arizal, one of the great mystics of the Middle Ages, the 16th century mystic, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, actually has, in one of the great works of mysticism, he has a thing called Shar HaGdomas, the gate of introductions. And with that, who walks in on cue? My good student and friend, Philip Namenworth, who has been listening to these introductions now for over 25 years. And you come to learn that life, everything is an introduction to the next stage. And that, I think, is a great blessing to tell somebody that may everything you learn be an introduction to learn something else. And then it's a journey, and it's not a destination. And we can then live long, healthy lives and show God that we have not reached our conclusions yet, and we have a long journey still to embark upon, knowing that we're constantly growing. So I think that's a good attitude to stay a little young, where you don't have it all figured out, and there's a few things that we still have, so a few more horizons that we want to conquer and climb, ascend, and aspire to. So, appropriately, being that they try to take some message from the weekly Torah portions, being that each one has universal messages that are timeless. And this is a key stereotype that we have to always bash, the stereotype that the Bible and the Torah is archaic and has nothing to do with our lives today. It's some type of primitive book from who knows when. And it may have some inspirational thoughts. Yes, I also once thought so, but then when I discovered that within layers, beneath the surface, lay layers and layers and layers of meaning in each word of the Torah, I understood why the Jews are still here today. Because they were not just following a Torah that was some primitive book. They saw in it relevant messages that were relevant 5,000 years ago, and 4,000 years ago, and in 2010 or 2009, as we conclude this year soon. So, in that spirit, I tried to take, this is one of the ways, either we do holidays or other things, a theme. Now, the central theme of this week's Torah portion, remember, this is the second portion of the entire Torah. After Simchas Torah, after the high holidays, we begin reading the Torah anew, appropriately, a new year, a new reading. We began with Genesis, the book of Genesis, the first book. The first chapter is Genesis, is Bereshis, beginning, which means the beginning. So that was discussed last week at length, here at the class, at the gathering. And this week, chapter 2, which is technically called in the Bible Noach, Noah, the name of the hero of this chapter. Noah, who him and his family are preserved from the great flood. But the central theme of this chapter is the great flood, the flood. And many things have been written about this flood, especially, is there evidence for it, is there no evidence for it? That I'll leave for other scholars to address. I'm going to focus on its relevance. Because whether it happened, even if it happened, and it can be proven that it happened, and I have no doubt that it did, the bottom line is, so what? So if a flood happened thousands of years ago, how does it affect us today? So it may affect the climate change and other things like that, but on a more personal level, Every story, as the Zohar says, the great classical mystical text says, that there is no such thing as a story in the Torah. Every story is a story of our lives. It's personal. It's a blueprint for life. So beyond the actual story, the narrative as we read it technically, literally, there's a story of you and I. And frankly, that is the Torah that we should be trying to understand. Because the rest is technical. I'm not suggesting the technical doesn't have value. I'm not suggesting that there aren't many layers of commentaries and interpretations. But the bottom line is that the key is, as one of the great, or a few of the great scholars write, the Torah speaks about things above and alludes to things below. Which means its language is really mystical language, spiritual language. And in that sense, in that context, we have to understand what is its higher story, what is its powerful spiritual story. And that makes it timeless. And this is not, as you'll see, and when you read the deeper mystical interpretations of these chapters, all the chapters, you'll find this is not forced. It actually becomes the natural narrative. When you start reading it, you say, wow, that is the story. And you find out that the technical part of it, the part that we look at on the surface level, becomes somewhat more alien to us. It's relevant because it's a technical story as well, and it happened in history. But the real story begins the story within. Think of it like when we meet people. So the first time you meet somebody, think of somebody you truly love, or you truly care about. The first time you met them, you didn't know who they were. And you may not even have known first time that there's something more to that person. When you begin to create a relationship, when you begin to develop a relationship with a human being, you begin to get beyond the surface. And when you meet that person, the face is just a symbol. You see the face, you recognize a person that you love. You recognize a person that has a whole story behind them that others will never see, others will never know. Because it's your history with that person. It's the story of human feelings, and it's the story of human intelligence, and the story of human emotions and unconscious stuff. You know, think of your own life. When someone looks at you, so you're this 6 foot tall human being, weighs so much and so much. The gentleman here pointed out why there's so many rabbis, he asked me, seem overweight, which was like a nice gesture, saying they seem, being it's a perception. Right? So each of us have our own weight stuff. And, that joke that the guy said, he went to the doctor, and the doctor said to him, overweight. But then he looked at the weight and height charts, and he realized he's not weight is not a problem, he's got a height problem. He's 10 inches too short, So everything is relative, relativity theory. So in that context, you look at a human being, you look at yourself, someone sees you, small little creature, like you and me, and what lies within you. So every one of us knows we're far from simple. You don't even have to add all the psychological ghosts and scars that haunt us. Just who we are as individuals enough. But when you think about all the layers and layers of everything that's within your personality, just one human being, no way that it could be captured in saying this person is 5'5" or 5'10" or 6 foot tall and weighs 200 pounds or whatever the amount is, and has blue eyes or this color hair and this age. Those are completely technical. They're almost irrelevant. I'm not suggesting they're completely irrelevant, because obviously this is the body that manifests in this world. But it's irrelevant when you compare it to the story of your life. The story of your life is not visible at all. You can't see it in the color of the eyes. You can't see it in the height, no other way. You could sit with a person and not know that they have just suffering terribly within, unless they show it to you. You could be with someone who seems to be very sad, but they have a lot of deep happiness within. So how many layers? What is the story of your life like? Can one book capture it? Can 20 books capture it? Not that we're writing it up, but my point is being that surface means nothing when it comes to real experiences. Real experiences are not measured by external parameters. Even though we're constantly measuring things that way. They love to tell us the cliche, don't judge a book by its cover. In fact, everybody judges a book by its cover. That's why cover designers get a lot of money, and people buy books based on design, but they still say don't judge a book by its cover. Do you know anyone that doesn't? You ever know anyone? Obviously, within the book there's much more than the cover, but covers happen to carry a lot, because we are, on one end, superficial people who can get seduced and our emotions can become completely seduced by sensory stimulation. But when you think about it, you step back, you don't like to be judged that way. How many people have you judged in your life by their covers, when you yourself do not like that? And the Talmud tells us, don't do unto others that which you don't want done to yourself, but we still do it. Because whatever it is, whether we live frenetic lives, or we're rushed, or we're lazy, or it's easier to gravitate to stereotypes, we all judge people by their covers until you think about it. And you step back and you say, hey, this person, I thought they were one thing, and I find out something else. Now, it's true, some people give off a vibe that's not so pleasant. That doesn't always mean it's the only thing about them. It could be they give that off. But you sometimes find, when you meet somebody, they have a lot of anger inside of them. You dig a little deeper, and you find out the anger comes from somewhere. Not justifying it, because we're all responsible human beings that we have to take control of our lives. But the point is that we have layers and layers, and there's no one that does not. No one in this room and no one on this earth. So then why, when we look at the Torah, should we not apply the same rule? That what you see on the surface is the simplest thing. It's just the surface. It doesn't tell you anything about what's going on within. So the question is, what is within the story is the focus that I try to focus on week after week in this gathering here. So yes, the technical story is like a key, is like a code that can help us decipher and open up the doors, but the key is to remember to go beyond that surface. So what is the technical story? So the technical story, the Bible begins this chapter that the earth was filled with evil. People became so corrupt that they began to destroy each other. Self-destruct, self-interest, corruption, greed, all that comes, all the destructive forces that come when self-interest goes rampant and there's no control. There's no regulation. And as a result, God, who created this universe, sees that the earth that He created, as the Torah begins, Mala Aretz Chomes, is filled with crime. Now, in the way the rules of existence go, it's not a matter of punishment. In Judaism and Torah, the concept of reward and punishment is completely misunderstood. It's just another surface stereotype. Reward and punishment translated as cause and effect. When you put your hand in fire and your hand gets burned, God forbid, is that a punishment? Is nature punishing you? Is God punishing you? Is the fire punishing you? Obviously not. It's cause and effect. We live in a world of rules and laws, including laws of nature. You do certain things, there are going to be consequences, whether you like it or not. Cause and effect, action, reaction. So the same is true in the Torah when you talk about the whole story of the human drama that unfolds, that when people are going to be selfish, it's not just that others will get hurt. The person who's selfish also ends up getting hurt. Jewish thought, the idea, for example, to be charitable, kind, virtuous, is not just a good thing to do. People think it means, listen, God blessed you with gifts, with money or with other gifts and skills. The only right thing to do is to share with others something that you have. It's deeper than that. We have within our personalities, within our psyches, a thing called chesed. It's a force. It's a force. It's a archetype within your soul called love. And it needs to be exercised just like the muscles in your body, and just like other parts of the body need exercise, so do our personality features. How do you exercise that part of your psyche that's called love? By being loving. If you don't exercise it, you don't give, that part of you will atrophy. Like that joke about the guy who's getting heart surgery, they're looking for a heart transplant. They ask him, whose heart does he want? So he points to somebody that lives in a certain place, a very wealthy miser, and says, why do you want his heart? He says, because it's never been used before. He wants a new, fresh heart. A little gallows humor. I don't mean it literally. You understand the point. So the point, to exercise the heart requires acting in a loving way. So love, in a sense, the whole concept is turned upside down. It's not just what you do for others, it's what you do for yourself. And the opposite of love, which is selfishness, or a self-interest driven by yourself taking care of your own needs. Yes, it will hurt others, but it'll also hurt you. And this is a fundamental theme, a fundamental concept of Judaism, that we live in a very complicated, interactive, and I would say network of relationships. There's no such thing as doing something and nothing else is affected. If you bounce a ball on a wall, it will bounce back. You bounce it straight, it will bounce back straight. You bounce it crooked, it will bounce back crooked. So you may not see the immediate impact of your own selfishness or narcissism, but it's not just going to hurt others. It will have to hurt you because we are all part of one big picture. And we are part of it, as I said, with musical notes. Even if the composition, let's say this musical symphony, lasts for 2 hours, if one note in the beginning of the symphony somewhere was flawed, somewhere it's going to impact the last note as well. No different than an ingrown toenail is going to make your life miserable, even though it's so far away from your brain, relatively speaking. Because because existence is not, we're not a composite. The world is not a composite of pieces. It's really one unified whole that's made up of many different fragments that all are like a machine that work in a certain symmetry. And one way it will affect everything else. This has been now proven in the most extreme way possible, especially in modern physics, where you look, till this, no one can understand how subatomic particles sense what is going on billions of miles away, faster than the speed of light. That there's some type of connection between the inner workings, the microscopic particles that connect all of the universe, that they in some way sense each other, no matter how far apart they are. And not through traveling. As I said, speed of light is like light travels. So there's called light years away, because light travels at a certain speed. How is this connection made? No one really fully understands it. In quantum mechanics, there are string theory, there are other theories of trying to understand that there's, bottom line is the consensus is there's some type of invisible net that all of existence rests in. So that net, even though it may be billions of miles apart, you shake one part of the net, the other part of the net feels it. Because it's really one entity, one reality. In other words, the universe as we see it as pieces is an illusion. It's not pieces. There's a unity that's beneath it all. And the pieces are just what we see with our limited vision. So with that being said, the inner story, which is the unifying story that connects it all, ultimately tells you the story of what's going on here. As human beings begin to corrupt themselves, they end up destroying themselves. Now, it even plays itself out in a very simple way. Think of a community of 10 people. It's just easier to fathom than when you think about 6 billion people on Earth. So 10 people. 10 people work, they coexist with each other. But one of them begins to cheat. It begins to break the rules. And he gets away with it. We all know it's not going to last because it's 10 people. They're dependent on each other. The cheating is somewhere going to catch up. Someone else is going to be missing something. So maybe he's getting away with it for a while. At some point, it's going to come around. And someone else finds out he's cheating. He's cheating. I'll also cheat a bit. So now the cheater is being influenced. He may not even know that the other person caught him. This is common social experiments that you can see happening in a very, you can isolate it in a group of a few. And in many ways, as children, when we're in school, if we have good teachers, they will demonstrate this through exercises or through experiments, life experiments. But then it plays itself out in real life. You just multiply the 10 by many, and you get yourself a world of 6 billion people with many nations and cultures and races and religions. And all you really have is magnified self-interest that becomes the root of all hostility and war and so on. Now, I'm not trying to simplify matters. Obviously, once it gets magnified to that point, it becomes increasingly difficult to get under control because now it's a fire that's raging. Whereas with 10 people, you could sit them down and say, listen, guys, this isn't working, somebody cheated, and so on. Bottom line is, life is cause and effect. If you want to see it, look closely in a group of a few. If you may not see it in a very large group because it becomes too beyond unfathomable. But essentially, it all comes down to cause and effect. So the Torah begins and tells that story. That once human beings became driven by self-interest, that self-interest comes around and begins to self-destruct. So God, and here let's translate God as well, because the word God, again, can be stereotyped. Because when you read it technically, it sounds like this. Humans are here down on earth, and God is this guy with a long white beard in heaven that's waiting to strike us with lightning. He sees human beings are sinning, transgressing, and he sends down a flood and kills them all. That's the story. That's the let's call it the nursery version, the nursery school version of the story. If you want to have the mystics put it, I'll translate it now in a way the mystics would describe it, would be like this. The universe is made up of human beings who live in a world and they're looking for their purpose. And they may have lost their way. And if they lose their way long enough, they begin to hurt each other. They begin to hurt themselves. God is an entity called reality, is the essence of all of existence, is within it all. And it's the reality check that will always make sure that the balance remains. So it's not some type of outside entity or reality called God that sits on heaven, which is the way we would imagine it as human beings. It's an inner force that is essentially the essence of all of existence. And that inner force always remains healthy. So what does a healthy inner unity do when it sees the outer levels not working properly? It's going to force them to have to work together, and if it causes a cause and effect that they've self-destroyed, it's not a punishment, it's the cause and effect of reality at work. So in a way, it's a blessing. Think of it this way. If you have 10 corrupt people and they continue to thrive, that would be the curse. The blessing would be that they self-destruct. So for number one, they become aware at least that something is wrong. Number two, maybe if you break which is broken, you begin to fix things. So in human terms, we relate to reward and punishment in human anthropomorphic terms. So we think of it, child misbehaved, punish the child. That is not cause and effect. That's a deterrent. That's a disciplinary measure. The Torah, you're talking about a reality that is trying to keep a universe aligned. And when something's not aligned, it's going to beg for correction. Think of it as a market correction, if you like. Okay? It's a market, a reality check. So in our human bodies, to use an example, God forbid, a bacteria that is an infection invades the body. So of course the body has its measures to protect from such invasion. But let's say it gets beyond the first line of defense. Your skin, your hair, your outer layers of epidermis, as they put it, right? And it enters in and God forbid infects something inside of the body. So the body will go into a certain series of motions to fight the bacteria, to fight the infection. It will send the white blood cells. It's a war. Simple as that. Is this healthy or unhealthy? It's the healthiest thing possible. Because it's not that there's wars, that there's an infection, that there was an intruder here. So the way to cleanse it, the only way is through a cause and effect system called the immunity system. Just broaden that to the broader sense, the same thing as in the human race. The human race also has a certain reality check, an immune system. That when red flags will go up and certain buttons will be pressed, the immunity system is going to go into action. So the flood was not just some type of punishment coming from heaven, it was a direct cause and effect. That's the way this chapter is read by anyone that reads the inner story. And this happens in our lives as well. You think anxiety or troubles that we have, or things that we're flooded by, let's say you're flooded by emotions, or you're flooded by by anxiety, or other feelings that overwhelm you. Does that come from in a vacuum? You suddenly wake up one day and you're suddenly overwhelmed? Or is it coming from built-up forces, pent-up forces, that over years, whether it's due to abusive childhood, or due to other trauma, or other things that were not taken care of, after a while it's going to erupt. After a while, it will flood you, and it will overwhelm you. Initially, you may be able to function side by side with some anxiety. People learn to cope. They learn to cope with a lot of pain. I know people who've grown up in very terrible homes, and pain became their standard. They learn to tolerate. They have a high tolerance level. But there's a point in everybody, there's a breaking point where it's going to catch up. So when it floods you that way, would you say it's some punishment from heaven? No, we'd like to get rid of it. So therefore, some of us medicate. Some of us find other ways to numb ourselves. But the healthiest thing to do is to recognize someone's crying out inside of your soul and your psyche saying something's wrong. Fix it. So it's good to get rid of a short-term. You try to find short-term solutions to so-called stem the pain, nip the pain in the bud, or stem the flow, stop the blood, so to speak. Get out of the line of fire. But the real solution has to come back, going back to the root. What caused this overwhelming series of emotions? And you may be surprised to hear, my friends, that anxiety, the Kabbalists say, is this cry of your soul, telling you that your life is misaligned. Anxiety is not some type of mysterious or random sense. It tells you there's something not aligned in your life. And the more sensitive you are as a human being, the more anxious you'll be. Because if you're less sensitive, then you become desensitized to the pain. That would be like someone who doesn't feel pain anymore because they're so used to it. That's not a blessing. That means that you lost your senses have been numbed, have been dulled. So the idea of sensing something, feeling it, is at least a sign that there's some sign of life, and this life is crying out, do something. I feel choked. It would be no different like a baby waking up in the middle of the night, crying for food. It's in pain. Imagine a baby didn't cry. So crying can be quite annoying. I can tell you, I have a baby in my house right now. I always mention my granddaughter. She actually is a very small. She doesn't cry a lot, but when she does, it's not. So I said to my daughter the other day. I said, why didn't God create three options? A pleasant cry, an annoying one, and one that sounds like music or something. Because obviously we would ignore the other two. We'd only respond to the annoying one. So it's an annoying cry, like an alarm clock. It's a wake-up call basically, and the child has no other way to cry out, so it cries that way, telling there's a problem. You would not want to have a child that does not cry, God forbid. But however, we live in a fast food generation, and we like quick solutions. So we take a painkiller. Imagine giving your child a pill every time the child cries in order to stop crying. That wouldn't be exactly wise, right? So the same thing is, for instance, with guilt. I'm sure there's some pharmaceutical agencies and laboratories in Switzerland or wherever they are working on a guilt-free pill or something. Like, you do anything you like, take this pill, you wake up, you don't feel guilty. That would make a lot of money. No? Anybody here would buy that? You don't have to admit it. No confession. I have some other ideas like that in case you want to discuss some business ventures. So, the point is that that individually we all relate to this concept, yet we don't like it. We'd like to say, I have a headache, I'd rather just take a painkiller, get rid of it. Obviously, do whatever it takes to get rid of the meaty, but if it continues to persist, you're quite wise to figure out what the root of it is. So when the Torah talks about a flood, it's not about a flood, it's about human beings who have self-destroyed, self-destructed. And God is giving us a blessing and telling us, here's what happens when people begin to be selfish and begin to be driven by self-interest to the expense of others. So let's analyze this a bit further, and you'll see immediately its relevance to our time, though it's thousands of years since the story was related. And it goes like this. We'll go. When we are overwhelmed with anything, as I said before, or use the word flooded, a deluge. So, what is it really saying? It's saying that you're not in control of the situation. Let's think technically. God forbid, you're on a boat, and the boat capsizes. And you're suddenly in the water, and you can't find your bearings. So what's happened is that some force has overwhelmed and controlled the situation, and you've lost your ability to navigate. That's what a flood is. A flood suddenly overwhelms, even in a physical sense, it overwhelms. Now, what is the root of a person being overwhelmed? Is because a person does not have a strong center, or in this case, a strong boat that protects them from these attacks. Look, you see people in the last year, the economic crisis. I've seen people literally become completely devastated, no different than a tsunami would have struck them. Some have even committed suicide. Thank God, not many, but some have. But others have done more destructive things that are maybe not so manifest, like in a physical sense, like taking their lives, but are devastated. Why are they devastated? Because all their eggs were in the basket of their economic success, and as soon as you lose that, and that's your identity, there's nothing left. So when things are riding well, and you think you're in control, you feel happy. When is it exposed who is really a strong, when do you expose a true strong tree? Not in the time of, in the calm, in a storm. You want to know what boat is the strongest boat. When a storm strikes the sea, you see which one withstands the storm. In other words, you don't build strong trees in the middle of a storm, you build them beforehand. And those with the deep roots that have those ability to weather the storm will withstand all those challenges. So the idea of a flood, essentially, when you feel flooded, you can rest assured that's immediately a sign of a force, of a voice, of forces in your life that are more powerful than you are. To put it in other words, it means that you have not yet found your center. A person with a center can never, ever be overwhelmed. Viktor Frankl, who was a secular psychologist, described as much in his Man in Search of Meaning. The Holocaust doesn't get more overwhelming than a Holocaust. And I'm not going to get into graphic detail. Families were completely wiped out. After the war, you're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of orphans, widowers, cities, towns, communities, everything was wiped out. It's hard even to imagine. I was not there. For me, it's a story, but I heard it firsthand from people. So no way to deny it. How many more overwhelming things can be losing your entire family? Almost, I can't imagine anything more overwhelming than that. I'm not even talking about losing your bank account or losing your home. I'm talking about everything, all that, all the above. What are they left with? How could a person like that even begin to rebuild? Yet, there were those that rebuilt, there were those that didn't. So obviously it's an unbelievable study to figure out how did these have the, who had the, where did they get the fortitude to rebuild, where they got the fortitude not to rebuild. Now no one can be simplistic in this because we all know that human resilience and human force and strength is more than just one factor. Probably a combination, not probably, definitely is a combination of many factors. But nevertheless, you could identify some. And Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor himself, and was in the camps, witnessed it, and he was a trained person who looked for these things. And he just says, unequivocally, see, Freud and even Carl Jung and others, they did not have the, I don't want to say the honor, but they did not have the test of standing in the Holocaust. That's where you see the worst and the best come out of a person. And it did bring out the worst in some people, but it also brought out the best in some people. So you had that rare opportunity to watch trauma affect people, and not just individual trauma, collective trauma that will touch millions and millions of lives. And essentially he came to one conclusion. You would think that a scientist would come to the conclusion, very deep resignation, one of completely cynicism, seeing what human beings could do to other human beings. And yet he came to the conclusion that people, the ones, that's where the word meaning comes from, man in search of meaning. The people who had meaning in their lives, people who had a purpose, before they entered the Holocaust, not they developed one there, are the ones that had those roots, that when the storm struck, those were the only trees that remained standing. So whatever you want to say about scientific theories about religion and faith, this is undeniable. Because the fact is, despite all predictions after the Holocaust, which was a flood in our times, you can say, you see families rebuild, people who had nothing left rebuild their entire homes. And not because they forgot and they were more in denial and they forgot what happened the day yesterday. Not at all. For many of them, it was driven by what happened. For them, it was the revenge, the ultimate revenge. Not to blow up cafes in Germany. And not to, the story of history is that every nation that was ravaged, when it came to power, its revenge was to destroy the nation that ravaged it. Show me one exception in history to that rule. Everyone. From the beginning of history till today. That's the first thing they did. If not the first thing, the second thing. As soon as they came to power, they wreaked vengeance on those that ravaged them. The only exception are the Jews that came out after World War II. They built a nation called Israel, and nobody has suggested that Israel bomb Germany, or attack Germany, or try to conquer Germany. And not because they don't have the army or stuff like that, because Jews don't think that way. It's another discussion. What did they do? Something more powerful. Vengeance? We'll build our families, and we'll have little Jewish children running around the streets of Berlin, despite what many people think. And we'll rebuild our families and homes, and we will say that we have children and grandchildren who are named after people who don't have graves. And we want to see whether the Germans have people that their grandchildren one day will talk about them that same way. Because this is a much deeper revenge. It's driven by light, and it's driven by a deeper belief of a higher purpose, and that nothing can shake that purpose, even evil can't. Which is a fascinating statement that a Jew can say to God, you deserve to be prosecuted for what you did, but I will not become a bad person because of it. This is a statement made by true people of faith. That you can speak to God that way. And God has no response to something like that. So this is what a flood can do. It can bring out unbelievable strength. So here's a situation when people are overwhelmed. In this case, as the story of the flood in this week's chapter, the overwhelming part, is a direct result of their own corruption. It is people of humility that can never be flooded, because there's nothing to flood. There's no ego there that is going to be overwhelmed. Only when you think you're somebody can you be destroyed. If you don't think you're somebody in the first place, you can't destroy that individual. It's like you can't make something invisible. It thrives on being invisible. Now, I don't mean this in a negative sense. I mean it in a positive sense. The concept of bittul in Judaism, the idea that we suspend our self-interest for a higher purpose, is actually the secret of immortality and invincibility. Because as long as you're dedicated to your interests, no matter how good they are mortal. And they can be therefore, and they're subject to the laws of mortality. As soon as you dedicate your life to something beyond yourself, to a cause, to a force that's higher, by the fact that you suspended your own self-interest, you have touched now immortality. You have touched something that gives you immortality, because you can't destroy something that is not a being, is not an entity. That is the source of all security, ultimately, true security. It's a very hard lesson to learn in times of peace. Usually it's learned only in times of floods. But sometimes then it may be a little late. So here you have the story of a flood, flooding an entire world. But I'm talking about it in psychological terms because it's easier to relate to. That when you're flooded by anything in your life, whether it's anxiety or fear, or you wake up completely overwhelmed, it is a direct result of having lost your center, or one can even say maybe never having found it yet. And therefore you will be subject to this flood. It will affect you. There's no way around it. It's cause and effect. But it can be looked at as a positive as well. It tells you something. It tells you, where's your boat? Where are your roots? If you can't withstand the storm, maybe wait next time, rebuild. Don't wait for the storm to strike. So here God tells Noach then, before the flood, he says, build yourself a teva, an ark. And this ark will preserve and protect you as when the flood will strike. As I said, the flood is a direct effect from people's own self-destruction, as I described earlier. So they build a teva. The Baal Shem Tov says that the word Hebrew, teva, for boat, there are many words for a boat or a ship in Hebrew. There's aniyah, there's sfina, and there's teva. Teva is actually one that is usually not used. But here God chooses the word teva. So the Baal Shem Tov says that the word teva also means letter. Teva. A teva in Hebrew is a letter, a word. Letters, he says, reflect the same idea that if you want to protect yourself from the waters of any overwhelming force, you have to build around yourself words, letters, Hebrew, holy letters. And he says that the tevas of Torah and Tefillah, of Torah and prayer, that create this insulation, like a boat that protects a person even from a stormy and flooding oceans. And this is what Noach and his family enter into. And they spend there 40 days, 40 nights, as the flood rages, as the Torah says. As the waters raged, the teva would float and bob up and down above the waters. We'll get back to that soon. That's why I'm reading it. It says, as the waters intensified and they became overwhelming on the earth, the teva rose above the waters and floated on it. And then it continues and says, and it got even stronger, the storms and the floods, and covered all the hills, even the highest mountains, under the heavens. And at the same time, the teva still remained above it all. And then after the flood finally subsides, and in a sense, the cause and effect of people who are hurting each other brings that effect of a called reality check. I said earlier that when we hurt each other, we end up hurting ourselves. That's how it works. Self-interest will come back to haunt you. And finally, when the waters subside, so then it takes a while, the whole process till the waters dried, and Noah sent out the bird, first the raven, then the dove, a whole series of events which I won't discuss now. I discussed it a few years ago in the class. Finally, when the water has subsided enough, God has to tell Moses, leave the ark. Same in Ateva. Because at this point, Noah felt comfortable with his family. They've insulated themselves. Why does he want to go out back to a corrupt world, or potentially corrupt world, that had to be overwhelmed by this flood? But he has to be told, so he's told, commanded, just as God commanded him to go into these words, now he's told to leave these words, these surrounding words. So all this, as you'll see in a few minutes, is all part of a story of our own lives that reflects itself very much in our life today. So we call this time and age the information revolution. And people are very proud of that statement, that there was an agricultural revolution first, and then there was an industrial revolution in the 19th century, and then finally led to computer revolution, which is now the information age of knowledge, information revolution. And it is quite an unprecedented achievement. Just 20 years ago, or even less, what was the most valuable commodity of any corporation? It was information. The trade secrets that they had locked under in vaults, and so on. So I'm sure there's still some of that, but today it's almost been reversed. Today you can find information almost anywhere. When Andrew Carnegie established and built the whole library system in the United States, it was meant to give fair or equal opportunity to people who did not go to school, so they can go to libraries and gain knowledge. Knowledge is power. Knowledge gives you the opportunity to compete with others who have more knowledge than you. Today, information is actually the opposite is true, that you can go and search for something, and you need someone to tell you what not to look at. So whereas let's say from the world of journalism, for instance, I come from a family of journalists, so the scoop of a story was a big thing. That was the key to all journalism. Finding the story, being there first, seeing it first. Today's the opposite. It's seeing all of the stories about one particular event and figuring out which is the most legitimate one. Today, the access to information has changed dramatically. So there's no question there's an information revolution. But you can almost say that how can you distinguish, what's good information, what's bad information? That's the challenge today. Whereas upon a time in the past, it was the opposite. The only information you had was the only thing you had to go with. Then there's this effect on us as human beings. We may not even know its effects because we're so close to home. It's so new. This access of to know anything, everywhere, anytime, is something that's relatively very new. And for us, it's all still a novelty. They'll probably study it in a few generations from now, the psychological impact on it, on all of us. But we're so close to it, and we see it as so novel and so powerful, and who is not seduced by it in some way? I'm sure there are some that are not, but it affects us all because it definitely puts at your fingertips unbelievable amount of power. And but if you think it's giving you any more focus in your life, and that you're closer to finding your personal mission statement and therefore personal happiness, obviously the opposite is true. Because when you don't know anything, at least you don't know anything. Here we can convince ourselves we know everything. I can find out any information, anytime, about anything. So it gives you the illusion of power. But it has no power at all because it didn't make us personally. Can you show me somebody that has found more love in this time, in this generation, than the past generation? I understand there's J-Date and there's other internet dating services I'm sure have yielded some relationships that are lasting. But I would submit that's just because they were able to find each other faster. It doesn't mean that it teaches you the ingredients of what makes a loving person. Information does not make people more loving, nor the opposite. It really does not at all. But it creates an illusion of power. So one could argue that the more we know, and when you don't have a core root, the less happy you'll ultimately be, because it does not replace, as they say with computers, junk in, junk out. Is that what they say? Garbage in, garbage out, one of those things. A computer can crunch numbers very quickly and process information very quickly, but it all depends on what you put in there. So a guy told me, who's been looking for a relationship, a healthy one for years and years, he says he's been, it sounds humorous, but actually he told this to me. So I said, so what are you doing lately? about finding a good, healthy relationship. He says, I keep Googling the word love, and I'm trying to find some solution, you know? So he's got a lot of searches to go through, because I think love yields something like 20 million things. So you can have 20 million entries. You can spend it for 20 years. He'll definitely keep his mind off of it, maybe. I don't know how much love he's going to find. But you see, the fundamentals of what makes us human beings are not changed, as they say in Hebrew, ki hu zeh, meaning not at all, not one iota, by this whole revolution. Just like agricultural and industrial revolution did not change relationships, it changed the way people interacted. From the agricultural revolution to the industrial, instead of living around agrarian systems of people living around farms, the whole idea of urban life began and other things like that. But we are as human beings does not change at all by any of these things. I don't know if you needed to come here tonight to hear that, but just be aware that blackberries and other stuff like that is never going to change who you are as a human being. How do you like that revelation? Elena? Good? So, when we talk about, therefore, a flood, is this a blessing or a curse? This whole being overwhelmed. I met a guy, I remember I was in Boston, and he was driving me, and he said to me that he was so excited. And I saw, that it was a pathetic story, to be blunt. What was he so excited about? And he was telling me he was like 49 years old, and no time for a relationship, no time to find a wife. Why? Because he's going home now. He just got himself, he's one of these computer whizzes, we call them geeks, and he just discovered a new type of television cable. He has 5,000 cable stations from around the world, and he's going to test it tonight. So, he was so excited. He shared it with me. I said, he said to me, you know how long it takes to go through 5,000 stations? He's mastered, because he has like 6 screens or something. That it can take him 4 hours. He says, 10 o'clock I start after dinner, until 2 o'clock in the morning I have my work cut out for me. So I thought, okay, maybe he does it one night a week. Fine, that's what he does. And he tells me every night. I literally wanted to cry, because he was an intelligent person who got himself busy with this, and he's like obsessed with it. It's his goal. He'd be able to go through all these stations. Now, what does he get at the end of getting all those stations? I'm not really sure. But, it's a certain amount of, I guess, knowledge that he knows everything that's out there. And he was like one of these college grads, went through graduate school, intelligent, but obviously emotionally was far from intelligent, and did not go through emotional graduate school, let's put it that way. And it wasn't my mission to focus on him in that sense, even though his sister told me, I knew why she made me have a ride with him, because she sent him to pick me up, because she wanted me to discuss this with him. Well, I wasn't going to go there. I felt this was like, I never like to say a lost case. I'm sure there's no lost case, but I was like amazed. 49 years old. He was 15, 16, 17, one thing. So I said to him, so any other priorities in your life? I just saw in front of my eyes, really, the story of many of our lives. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure I've also been distracted. Not to that extent. I don't want to just point a finger at him. For me, it was symbolic of the information revolution. Here is a man who's been flooded by the information revolution. So is this like a blessing? Or did God curse this guy? Because he's never going to be free from that. I can't see unless something, I don't know what's going to get to his head. And he lives his life through the things. I'm sure he finds among those 5,000 stations a story of love and a story of romance, and he lives his life through other characters, and you can get away with that to some extent. So you keep desensitizing yourself. So is it a blessing or a curse? So the obvious answer to this rhetorical question is that it's a blessing. Information, knowledge is always a blessing. Because like anything, it's neutral. It depends who you are and what you do with it. The curse of it is not in the revolution itself or the information or the flood even. Remember the flood, when the flood struck back then, the great flood is made of water. Water is a blessing. Water is a blessing. Without water, there's no life. The problem is when the water floods, when it comes too fast, too overwhelming, and you have nothing to protect yourself, no boat to be in. But the flood itself per se is not necessarily a curse. It's all perspective. It's all context. So, in a way, in a strange way, you could argue, and you could say it's even hinted to in mystical writings, that in the last generations we will be flooded by many things. We are definitely living in a flooded time. Information is number one, but it's not just information. Even wealth. It's odd to talk about that in this current economic climate, but there never has been such an accumulation of wealth ever in history. So relatively, we call this a recession. But the amount of wealth, the amount of food that is wasted. For us, we've gotten spoiled. So now take away a little of all the toys and gifts and candies we've been given, so we feel deprived. But compare it to any other generation, it's a complete flood. A flood that is in many ways blessings, blessing upon blessing upon blessing. For Jews in particular, we have freedom that is unprecedented. If our grandparents or great-grandparents saw a generation like this, they would think, these are messianic times. That Jews can sit and study, send their children to any school they like, do anything Jewish in any way possible, and not be discriminated, institutionally at least. It doesn't mean there isn't anti-Semitism, but institutionally you cannot be discriminated against. And we can sit here and do whatever we wish as Jews in this room, and there's no one standing outside waiting to arrest us, let alone much worse than that. That is absolutely unprecedented. So we have many, many gifts that have flooded and that have been blessed with us. Is this a blessing? The blessing is definitely a blessing. So where's the cursed part? The cursed part is, God forbid, when you try to gorge a child who's hungry, or not a child, an adult, and give them too much food after they've been fasting, what happens? Suddenly that which is a blessing can destroy that person. The same blessing becomes a curse. To use it in less graphic terms, since I see you're squinting, in the story of the Talmud, there was a famine, and the great sage Noach prayed for rain, and and he prayed for rain, and his prayers were successful. But what happened was they were too successful. The rain started pouring down in floods. What happens when it floods? It doesn't make things grow. It destroys the fields because it gets down quickly. It destroys the soil. It destroys the ability for the soil to absorb and begin to grow. So you had to pray a second time with the expression Reiv Teva Einim Yechem L'Kabel. So much good we cannot accept, we cannot contain, we cannot receive it. And that prayer was finally successful. We want raindrops. Let the rain come down, but let it come down in drops, drop by drop by drop, in a speed that allows the soil to absorb the rain. And then the next drop comes down. And that is the healthy. That's why, in a sense, rain is like Gvura Shebechesed. It means it's chesed, it's love, and it's flowing. But it requires, just like a car needs the gas and brakes, you need the brakes that allow the gas to be tempered, or else you have destruction. So, and this is true for any type of loving relationship, communication, education. A good teacher is not just someone who knows how to teach and transmit knowledge, also knows what not to say, and knows the pace to say that can be absorbed by those that are listening. The same as when you convey love to someone that you love deeply. We can flood somebody and overwhelm them with our love. You may be a very loving person and have so much to give, and actually be desperate to give because you have no one to give in your entire life, and you can destroy the other person. I've seen this too. Not destroy them with hate, or destroy them with depriving love. On the contrary, exactly like with the story with the rain, too much. Or at least too much for that person to contain. True love means not just that you know how to give, but you also think of another person and saying, can they contain what I have to give? Which forces you to think about the other person and their containers. This is critical in communication, in love, in rain, wherever you turn, you'll see that this is, all success is the ability to balance those two forces. Chesed and Gvura in Kabbalistic terminology. So, when you talk about a flood, is it a blessing? It depends who you are and depends what you have. So in a sense, we have a generation that is a paradox. God has blessed us with unprecedented amounts of prosperity. And I mean prosperity, I mean on all levels, not just, I don't mean just financially, I mean with information, with knowledge. Almost anything can be accessed today, at least in the Western world. No question about it. You could sit at home and literally, without moving, access things that were once impossible to access. What that says is really depends on who you are. It can flood and destroy you. It can flood and not destroy you and overwhelm you. Or it can be absorbed. And this is what this chapter talks about. That all levels of this, even the destructive part, has lessons that we can learn from it. The idea of this prosperity itself actually comes from a very special place. That after years and years, and this is how the mystics would put it, after years and years of human efforts and initiatives, after the millions, if not billions, of mitzvahs that have been done, this universe has been refined to the point where we are now figured out how to manifest through science and technology of unprecedented unity that allows us to access things that we never could have accessed. Basically transcending time and space. Whereas, let's say, 1,000 years ago, you wanted to get a message to someone, just 100 miles away, you'd have to hire a whole caravan of camels, and you wouldn't even know if the message got, because you definitely would not get a receipt. And most people died and born in the same town and not know what was going on just a few miles from them. Today, the whole opposite world, you can sit here in New York, press a button, and immediately communicate, I love you, to someone in Australia. Maybe even out to outer space once they discover extraterrestrial life. Television transcends time and space. You could see things that would take pictures or who knows how long to get that picture. Is this a blessing? Absolutely. The way the Kabbalists would put it is that the resistance that separated time and space over all these years has been melted down due to human endeavor. And it's a fascinating concept, so I'm going to repeat it. That when the universe was created, when Adam and Eve were in Garden of Eden, there also was the power of electricity, the power, computing power. There were subatomic particles. Subatomic particles were not invented in the 20th century. They were just discovered in the 20th century. Where were they in the Garden of Eden? They were inside the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. They were all over the place. But no one knew how to access them, and no one knew how to tap into them. So you had these invisible forces that potentially could unite the universe. And even the great tzaddikim of the time did not access them. When Moses spoke from Mount Sinai, after Mount Sinai, this required either a miracle. He did not have the tools of amplifying voices or other ways that you have today of technology. Not that his message didn't get across. Frankly, he probably got across more than with all our Blackberries and all our computers. And his words still resonate today, which is even more astounding. But all these forces were in nature. Where were they all? So the mystics explain, using the language of the Kabbalah, divine sparks are embedded in all of existence, waiting to be released. How do you release them? When you work hard. You want to release the divine sparks in something? You have to work at it. When you're a giving person, you release divine sparks. When you take your money and give some charity, you release the divine sparks that are trapped in materialistic greed. Every mitzvah, when you make a blessing on a piece of food, you release divine sparks in the food. On a table that you study, you release the divine sparks of the table. Everything in existence, each of us is allocated a certain amount of, let's call divine sparks, means spiritual opportunities, to translate it even better. Everywhere there are spiritual opportunities. Every person you're going to meet, everywhere you'll travel, everything, literally, every interaction has a divine spark. Each of us is allocated a certain amount. We don't know the exact amount, but we know they're out there. So when you leave here tonight, there are divine sparks out there. They're right now in this room. You may meet someone here for the first time tonight, and if something good comes out of it, you release the divine spark. If you ignore that person or something negative comes out, you've basically trapped that divine spark. As I often quote Michelangelo's line when he says, how do you create these beautiful sculptures? He says, I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. That's our mission. How many angels will you set free in your lifetime? And they're all around you. Every interaction. So we are in a world like that. So when Adam and Eve started out the journey, and then as generations passed, those sparks began to be released. Here, some there. Obviously, Abraham was a major pioneer in that direction because he released many, many sparks, and he taught others, and he infused his children, instilled in them the passion and the mission to release sparks. That's the essence of Judaism, by the way. Mitzvahs is just another word for saying releasing sparks. A mitzvah means a connection. A connection with what? with the divine opportunities and everything that's embedded in this material world. And the fascinating thing is the Kabbalists teach that these divine sparks are only here in this material world. In the spiritual world, there are divine sparks, but they are much lower level. They don't have that intensity, and they wouldn't have the power to survive in this world. So in order for those sparks to exist in this world, they have to come from a very profound place. And that's why when we release them, they have so much power. So what happened over the years? An Abraham, a Sarah, Isaac, a Rebecca, a Jacob, Moses, all the great people, the people who gave their lives, people who lived in beautiful times, people who lived in difficult times. All our grandparents, what happened to all their work? We don't believe that it died with them. Each of them released sparks, revealed these opportunities, and they accumulate. What happens when enough accumulates? You have a flood. That's exactly what happens. So the flood is a blessing. It's a blessing of an accumulative effort. The curse is when it floods you because you don't know what to do with it. That's our challenge today. Not a challenge of deprivation. We have too much. And we don't even know what to do with it. We throw out more food than we eat. That food could feed the entire planet. I mean, I know this has been said. I'm saying it obviously in a different context. We have too much. And I'm not saying that's a curse. That's a blessing. It's a process. It's the reward. The cause and effect of so many years of progress. But what's lacking, if you don't have the center, you don't know what to do with it, then the flood can overwhelm you. So the blessing then becomes a curse. There's no question. So the Torah continues and says, there's a solution. Build an ark. Build words. You want to protect yourself, you better have a strong boat, a strong ship that surrounds you with holy, sacred words. Sacred words of song, of prayer, of divine wisdom, Torah. And these words are more powerful than all the gifts of our lives, all the material prosperity and all the abundance that we have. They're more powerful. And if you allow that to be more powerful, then the flood will be there. You'll have it all there, but we'll be able to float on it. It will never control you. You can control it. So as these waters rise, which is in a way a blessing, it also lifts the tevos, the words, also to a higher place. That same flood that can be so destructive. So the flood in its own strange way, you can say, is both a blessing and a curse. Yes, it was a curse for all the people on that earth that were flooded because they, number one, brought it upon themselves through their own corruption. And number two, they didn't have anything to protect themselves with. They were warned. God tells Moses and Noah, build the ark for 120 years. People laughed. He wanted them to see what you need to do. It wasn't just like the flood just came. It gave people a chance to correct their ways. But they were so self-consumed they didn't believe that's possible. The same as in our times. People will be destroyed, unfortunately, by this flood. And I've seen it. But we have a choice. We have a choice all the time. But what's even more fascinating is the end of the story. That after this whole flood and the ark and all that, God says to Noah, now you must leave. You cannot stay protected by the words of a kollel and a yeshiva and a seminary. And you have to go back out into a world where there can be self-interest and there can be corruption and there can be a flood. And you have to learn to build there, not just in the ark. The ark was a good time to protect yourself when things are raging. You have to now build an oasis. You have to be able to build in the real world, not just when you're protected by all these words of Torah and Tefillah. In other words, you have to reinforce yourself, but now enter into the fray, enter back into the battle. And Noah was very resistant. He didn't want to do it because he saw what happened. He saw what self-interest can do. So he said, why do I have to go out there? And even when he finally went out, he has to be commanded. Everything again. Everything that was told to Adam and Eve. Pruruvu. Have children. Build families. He did not want to do that. You know, and there is a personal application to that too. Many of people today in our time who've been flooded in their own homes with perhaps too much hatred or too much dysfunctionality don't want to build homes. I've heard this so many times, sadly, people telling me, I do not want to bring children into a world like this. I don't want them to suffer the way I suffered at the hands of my parents. It's not an easy thing to respond to if you really have empathy, because, you know, it's easy to get into intellectual argument about it, but if you really care and you're someone who really says that, like I remember one woman telling me this. She says, "You think it's easy for me to say this to you?" It didn't come easily. Like I made this decision. It came with deep pain. It's like I lost something and I don't want my children to suffer. Now, obviously, my response is, hopefully as sensitively as I can, I said, well, you know something, then you have not solved the problem. You've become part of it, with all due respect. Because you can build a life that you didn't get. Maybe build something better than what was given to you. You're basically saying that you're so damaged that you don't have confidence that you can give love the way, in ways that you did not receive. Which is definitely the case. And I obviously not saying it in any judgmental way, but it's similar to what Noah experienced. He didn't want to rebuild life. And God has to specifically command him, leave the ark, build the world, Eilam Chadash Ra. You build a new world because I created this world for a purpose. And no matter what happens, you cannot give up. Not on yourself and not on me and not on the purpose. It's very similar to what I said earlier, what Holocaust survivors did after they got out of the Holocaust. They did not give up. You'll rarely find someone that chose not to build a family. I'm sure there are, I've never met. But in most cases, they rebuilt. Which was, of course, no question, a more difficult choice. It would have been so easy to just become resigned and just live out your life and saying, look, I don't even deserve to be here. My brothers and sisters were taken. Why am I here? But most, across the board, built. I don't know where they got the strength, and I'll never know. But clearly something in their souls. So when you speak in that type of level, you speak in that type of dimension, you're talking about people who have built roots or built an ark that gave them not just power to survive the flood. That is great. It was more importantly that they gave them power to come back after a flood and rebuild life on earth where the flood first attacked. So there are many lessons that can be gleaned from this whole story, obviously that are very relevant to our times today. So though we don't think of our lives as being flooded, we live in comfortable homes. Hopefully there's no seepage and no water damage, at least physically. But the fact is, do you think your senses are overstimulated or understimulated? I think I mentioned this statistic when I flew to, was at a conference in Peru, Lima, Peru, with happiness. So I remember there one of my co-panelists shared the statistic that I shared here. The statistic goes, by age 20, each of us in the Western world have seen an average of 1 million advertisements. By age 20, 1 million. Forget about age 40, I don't even know what the numbers are there. I'm sure it's not just double. Age 20. Because age 20 includes from our childhood. And what he showed also a statistic was that the country that has the highest rate of people that consider themselves happy is Denmark. And there are different theories for it. Some say because they have health insurance or whatever. Not to get into that debate. His submission was, his idea was, his theory was in Denmark is the lowest amount of public advertising. There are no billboards and you don't see public advertising. So he was suggesting that the more you see, the more you want. And the more you want, the more you feel you are deprived of. That was his thought. And I don't know the exact statistics, but the concept is absolutely true. There's no question about it. There's no question about it. When you have 1,000 more options, and then you know that you can't get them all, there's no question you're going to be more miserable. When you have very few options, you just don't create such expectations. When you see others have so many options and you don't have them, then again you feel the same. So is this a curse that we have all these options? Absolutely not. It's a blessing. But it just shows, it just exposes that we don't have a center, we don't have a root, the teva, as I described, that allows us to navigate. So the fact is we are absolutely flooded. And if you don't feel you are, sadly, that may be the worst type of flood of all. They say today we are inundated. You go into a supermarket, you go anywhere. Not only your eyes and ears are being invaded, what's the word for it, violated, your sense of smell, And I read a fascinating study of how they design casinos. So this we know. You don't see any clocks. And we all know the pumping of oxygen and a few other things, the lighting. It's unbelievable. Billions of dollars have been invested in understanding human nature, how they behave in an environment to keep people there and stuff like that. But this is true, the smells in Walmart and the subliminal messages that we do not see in colors and between the colors, and it's all about selling things. No one likes to expose these things because it's just too much. And is it illegal? Well, you know, no one has really done a study of the psychological damage of all the information that's given our way. I know, for myself at least, when you go off and you just go out, leave the country, and for a week you haven't seen the New York Times, and all the scores and everything else that people consume, I always feel somewhat cleaner. I don't know about you. So what does that say? You know, it's like going to the mountains and you come back to you suddenly breathe for it means that our tolerance level is just going up and up. And I'm not from the fire and brimstone. I'm a hardcore New Yorker that's pretty addicted to the energy in this city. So I'm like in that boat. But I'm not deluded enough to think that we're not inundated. You know, when I was younger, I used to think, yeah, advertising affects everyone except me. Then I said, one second, so everyone thinks that. So why are they spending billions of dollars on all this advertising if it doesn't affect anybody? I realized it's affecting me more than I think it is. So how many Cokes did you drink today? Tell me, anybody. Diet Coke. Okay? The question is 2 or 20, you know. And I know some people have kicked the habit, so it's not Coke, it's some other product. Again, this is not a condemnation of modern society and the floods of our times, but this is a very flooded time, and it's a blessing, actually. As I said, it's many divine sparks that have been released accumulatively. And what our challenge is, how to look at it all. So it's, in a way, looking at the information revolution in that sense, that it's a blessing, not a curse, but it's a blessing that needs to be countered by something, is an interesting twist on how to understand the times we're in. You know, you'll hear people will say, you know, you have to create a drought by cutting yourself off. Enough is enough throughout your this gadget, that gadget. Check your email only once every hour instead of 5 times an hour. You know, whatever. That's called moderation, or you know, different methods. There's no question that there is benefits to that, and I'm sure all of us should try to the word for it, limit and moderate our consumption. However, there's another twist to it all, that they're all blessings, and they're blessings that can be channeled if you have an ark. And that's the real challenge I think we have, is how to build those arks. How do you have a center that no matter what happens to you, what fame you will achieve, what money you'll make, what blessings that will flood your life, you will be able to ride above it. That's the challenge. And that, of course, is harder to achieve, but it's much healthier. And that's really the challenge of our times, because then the flood can be used as a blessing, because you can use all this information, deluge, in a way that can help people. Not that it's easy, trust me. I'm trying this, experimenting with this Facebook situation. So that's a perfect example, man. That thing can be completely addictive, because you have all these friends and everybody's giving you messages, and some of them are important, most are not, you know, and even finding out who is and who isn't, that itself can be a whole lot day's work. But I'm experimenting because I'm not doing it, I'm completely not addicted to it, and I say that sincerely. I'm watching myself. I'm trying to see, can one use this? No, really, this is an exercise, my exercise for this week's flood parsha. Can one use this flood in any positive way? And trust me, I don't think it's beyond me to make mistakes. But I remember, Eleanor's not here, but when I traveled to Frankfurt, we have our good friends from Frankfurt here, which I acknowledge. So Eleanor got me this BlackBerry. She says, way to stay in touch, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote my article about it. I got more comments on that one than all. And I saw right away the trap of the BlackBerry. And I have to tell you, I don't really use it. As much as I saw its benefits, I really am able to, I'm very proud of myself. I think I deserve a medal. I'm able to resist the temptation of the BlackBerry. But I saw its strength. And frankly, I mean, I have my own way of dealing with it because I don't really need all its, I don't need to be connected that much, frankly. I have other ways. But it's interesting exercise with all the internet and so on. And I'm sure all of us have our addictions and connections and so on. It's a good week to maybe begin to just be aware of what you're doing. It's also pretty interesting. If you want to really be terrified, why don't you just add up the amount of hours? And you'll suddenly find out you are a statistic, as they say, the average. You're not an exception. The amount of hours that we spend is beyond tolerable. But it's not about scaring anybody. It's just really taking control of your life. And this flood that we're in a way, is so appealing. It's so seductive because it doesn't feel like you're flooded. You don't feel like you're underwater or something until you do. As I said earlier, some of our floods is more of the emotions, anxiety, and stuff like that. But it all comes down to what your mission statement is. And the teva, those words, those letters that surround you, that is ultimately the secret to it all. So if you want a life that you take control of, start building the teva now. You don't have to wait 120 years. Now is a good time to build it. The fact that you're all sitting here this evening is a good sign from my point of view. Not because I'm sitting here on this side, because the fact is you're committed to studying. You're committed to learning. It's the first way you build a teva. It means that you have something in your life that is perhaps more important than the playoffs. Even though, that story, I don't know if it's true or a joke, where the rabbi and the president, they became, they were building the synagogue for many, many years together. From his bootstrap, very difficult. For 20 years, they barely were able to make it every year. Finally, 20 years later, the rabbi tells the president, after all our hard work, we finally have fruits of our labor. This year, we're going to have 200 people, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And they signed up, and they're coming. So it's really, you should take pride and nachas from what you've done, what we've done together. And the president looks at him, very forlorn. He looks at him and says, Rabbi, the worst year that this could happen, because this year the playoffs are on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I just can't come to the synagogue. So the rabbi looks at him and says, you've never heard of a videotape? So the president says to the rabbi, I didn't know they could videotape the services. That's so good. So this is a sense of priority. You want them to basically bring him the videotape after the services so he can watch it. So it's about priorities, I guess, in some way. So I think if you haven't made a commitment like this, it's a good time to do so. Beginning of the year, good thing to show God and also show ourselves, is to commit to a weekly class, whether it's this one or it's another one. It's not a question which, but something that brings into your life a little taste of beyond, a little taste of not the same thing that you're doing all day and all night and your work. Something that transports you to another space. Because that transportation is something like this ark. It like lifts itself above the waters. And we all have the capacity because we have it in our soul. As I said at the beginning of tonight's evening, beginning of tonight's gathering, we have two parts to ourselves. There's a part that is the superficial one that gets caught up in the surface, into the moment's instant gratification, the fragments. But there's another part of us that clearly resonates with the idea that there's an underlying unity and there's underlying needs. And that as much as the surface may be something that seduces us, that ultimately your own inner happiness, your own inner drama plays itself out beneath the surface. And that really is the challenge that we all have. But you have to do something about it. How do you connect that inner part of your soul with your outer life? It cannot just be a meditation. It has to be some action. So the Torah, the Judaism, wisely gives us three types of actions. Study Torah. Try to designate whether it's daily or weekly, but designate it. Not even important how long. It's more important how consistent. Designate times where you go into your ark, so to speak. And you don't. And when you're in there, nothing should disturb. Not your cell phone, not other distractions. You're in there. You're completely dedicated to something that's above those waters. And the second thing is prayer, which is a similar type of oasis, but it's more emotional. Emotionally insulating yourself and allowing yourself to float above challenges. No matter what the day is like, you're able to go into this bubble. And the third thing is Gemilas Chasad, the third pillar, which is kindness, virtue, not just feelings, actions. whether it's charitable actions, whether it's volunteer work, whether it's other acts of virtue, anything, again, that is not driven by the zerem, by the tide of self-interest. That you change the course by saying, I'm going to do something not for me, but for somebody else. Even a few minutes. Again, all these things, like anything, consistency is more important than quantity. Consistency, a type of qualitative shift where you commit to it. And you'll see what happens is it begins to accumulate. And the ark gets built. But the key challenge, as you'll find out, for some of us, we have to build an ark and enter into it. For some of us, the challenge is the other way around. You have to leave the ark and go back out to a world and teach others how to build arks. Remember, it's not like a tzaddik in pelts, where you just put on a fur coat when you're cold. When it's cold, you also light a fire. You warm the whole environment, not just yourself. So, you see, Judaism is very demanding. When you don't have an ark, you have to build one. And when you build one, you have to get out of it. So you're never in one place. You're always moving. Bottom line, it's not about you and your comforts. It's about a higher purpose. If you're in a place where the flood is too overwhelming, you need a little ark. And if you're too much in the ark and too comfortable there, you got to get out of that too. And help others do the same. I think a commitment on that level of each of us is not it's not difficult, it's not something we cannot expect of each other. That's my suggestion to all of you. Obviously, every suggestion I make, I have to apply to myself as well, and I assure you that I will do more of this, even beyond that I've done till now. And hopefully, together, we can build many, many arcs in this flooded world, and actually then channel the whole information and its revolution and all the deluge of all the overwhelming forces in our lives into channels that will actually change the world for the better. Because remember, the power of email, the power of internet, the power of networking, also has the power to touch people in the most profound ways. I remember when I was driving once for Shabbos, I was giving a Shabbaton in East Hampton. On the way on Friday, I stopped at a gas station to get some gas. And you'll see just the fact that I remember the story, you'll see how the power of technology works. And after I was getting gas, right next door to the gas station was this club that was already preparing for the night's festivities. So a guy came over to me and asked me if I'm parking here for tonight. Am I coming to the party? He was like the parking attendant. So I said, not really, but if you tell me what's going on, maybe I'll skip the Shabbaton. Just kidding. Anyway, so we started talking like I was waiting for something. So I was waiting for the gas to fill up. And we started talking, and he said, a guy, I thought he was from some hick town somewhere in Long Island. And he asked me what I do. I told him I write, I teach. And he heard that I send out a weekly email. So he said, put me on the email. I'll send me the email. I took his email address, completely forgot about it. I brought it back to the office. I gave it. They put it into the system. And he started getting these weekly emails. This is like 7 years ago, this story. Around 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I get an email from him. He reminds me, I'm the guy that you met in the gas station attendant, and I know that you didn't think I was Jewish, but I'm Jewish. I mean, that's fine, But he says, I've been reading your emails religiously every week, and you should know this is my synagogue, this is my Rosh Hashanah, this is my Yom Kippur. I've learned all about Judaism through your email. I don't go to any synagogue. I never went to one. It's all through this email. And I was like, I was extremely moved. Only through technology. It never could have been possible. Because what would I have done? I'd taken his phone number and invited him to a shul in New York. Would he come? Not come? Would he be comfortable to come? Purely an email that I said, and I realized after that I almost, like anywhere I go, I immediately ask for people's emails, not for marketing purposes, but simply I realize you never know. You never know. And I've heard many stories since and before that like that, similar or different. And this is something each of us can do here. You cannot know. Find a friend and send them a short thought or something that touches you. Share that. You'll never know what kind of effect it has. Sometimes you'll be blessed and hear the feedback. Sometimes you won't. I'm sure there's stories I'll never hear about. And it's an amazing tool if you talk about a flood. Yeah, of the billions of emails that go out every day, a few of them that have this type of power, that's the reason from my point of view it was created. Why did God create this tool in the first place? So we don't usually think like that. We usually, hey, it's a gift. We got it. Like anything we take for granted. Technology. But remember, there had to be some forces in nature for this technology to manifest. It's not like it just came automatically. It's a gift it's a gift that can be misused, can be misunderstood, can be completely taken for granted and ignored, or it can be appreciated. There's an expression itself, that's an expression in the Medrash that says, God created gold in this universe only for it to be able to be used to build a holy temple. So then why is there gold that can be used for other purposes? Because he wanted to give free will. People should be able to choose. So when the big philosopher, Roman philosopher, came to Rabbi Akiva and said to him, if God didn't want sun worshippers and moon worshippers, Avodah Zarah, idolatry, he should have destroyed the sun and the moon. So Rabbi Akiva answered to him, you're a fool. Because because of the fools of the world will God destroy his own universe. Because those fools don't know what the sun and moon are for, and they use it for their own selfish purpose, that's God's going to destroy his own universe. So the great commentary, the Tesis Yontif, on the Mishnah there, asked the question that the philosopher should have followed up with the next question. So why didn't God destroy the fools? And of course the answer is that is free will. We have the freedom to choose to be a fool or not to be a fool. To see the means, the ends from the means. To see that gifts that are given to us in life are meant to be used not just for selfish gain, but for some higher purpose. So these are practical resolutions each of us can make as we enter the new year, 2 weeks after the high holidays. Noach tells us about the flood of life and the challenges of the flood, the destructive forces of it, but also the antidote, how we float, how we rise above it, and how we can even channel these floods into positive direction. So, I for one take this resolution upon myself. Is there anyone that's going to second the motion here at this meeting? No one? No? Okay, there you go, Donna. Very good. So, and everyone else in between, over and under. It's all right. You don't have to sign anything. Frankly, I think it's a personal gift for each of us. It's not something you have to commit to me, to yourself, and to your destiny and your soul. So, without the deluge of how many minutes was this flood of information? Really? No. I get the time. I want to make a few announcements and say, first of all, thank you for everyone for coming. It's always an honor to share, communicate. Please see me, the Meaningful Life Center, and all of us here as your friends, partners in crime, or in not crime. Jonathan, good to see you. Yeah. And let us all together, as I said at the beginning this evening, use the synergy that's more powerful than the sum of the parts. So we can play music that's greater than each of us as an individual. And that as a segue to my good friend Philip Namelworth back there. Please stand. Who gives a weekly class every Thursday right here, 7 o'clock. Singer-songwriter in his own unique style, and you're all absolutely welcome. It's fascinating. Philip has been many years studied with me, has his own flavor, his own style, is a great accomplished blues musician as well. And just look at his face, you see it's intriguing, right? He has a certain look. He blushes as well. The man blushes. Okay. And please look forward to much more programming coming as we enter this new season. As I said, it's always an honor to be here with you. And I like my Rebbe would always say when people get inspired, is that we have to take a little break from one farbrengen to the next. So we take a little break now until we see each other again next Wednesday, at the same time, same place. And Philip tomorrow is at 7 p.m. And we will soon be making some announcements about Hanukkah. The party goes on. Okay, everyone have a very good night. Thank you.